There we go. That's funny. Yep. Can you hear me? That's weird. Huh. Okay. Not sure what's happening there. Right. Can you hear me? Okay. So you can hear me, but I can't hear you? That's the issue. Okay, let me see something here. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yep. Microphone. Let's see. Volume. Interesting. Let's see. Run a little diagnostic here. Okay, the microphone's working, camera's working. So why am I not hearing him? Well, that's weird. But you can hear me. Huh. So why can't I hear you is the question. Huh. Very strange. Okay, hold on. Hold that thought. Okay, let's see something here. Huh. I wonder why that is an issue because I can hear other things, right? Let me just check something. Okay, so it's not on my end. Not sure what's happening. Yeah, I tried. Let me try one other thing. Stay right there. Try one other thing here. No, I'm gonna close it. Just close. Okay, let's see. I can hear me. Still can't hear you. That's so weird. Very strange. Huh. Hmm. That's really weird. This is interesting. I'm wondering. Let's see something. That's working. That's working. Hold on. Running another. that change anything? Not really? Okay. Let's see something. Okay. So. Hello, honey. What's going on? Oh, okay. Can I call you back? I'm very proud of you and I love you. Because I'm doing a show right now. It's okay, sweetie. I do one every Thursday night. I will talk to you soon, sweetie. Okay, bye. Huh. Okay. Let me try something else. So I can hear other things, but I can't hear him. So connection strength is strong. Let's see.
All right, well, let's start out with events that happened in your. I mean, I might have to. How's that? Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine. Got a little backup, a little feedback though.
Yeah, I'm not sure. How's that?
Well, we're about to find out.
Okay. The first thing I was talking was you had a 24-hour marathon.
Yes.
And I heard about that this morning. So, can you give us some details about that?
Okay. And I don't think this is the first year they've had it, though I couldn't swear to that. I think it's happened other years in the past. But as you have heard, let's see, what was the genesis? Give me a moment. I'll try to think. I remember what started this whole thing. But
I know it had something to do with the lot that there was a liquor store that was burned down, and they're replacing it with the supermarket.
Yeah. So I actually met Danny Parkins. He wasn't on-air talent when I met him. He might have been essentially just an intern. It might have been an intern at the time. But the Austin neighborhood is on the west side of Chicago, which is one of those places that people sort of mention to people to scare them in essence. It's funny to me how, people in one part of Chicago will refer to, another part of Chicago as if it's this, terrifying land full of werewolves and vampires or something. But the What About Chicago Radiothon was together with Sam Acho, Danny Parkins, By the Hand Club for Kids, but to deal with the fact that there's food deserts is the term that I think people usually use.
And to illustrate, I have seen kids go into gas stations to get their breakfast in the morning, and that's not great. I don't know how else to put that. And I've seen it happen, more than once. There are places where there are no real, and by real I mean places with a good, solid assortment of fresh fruits and vegetables, lean, healthy meats, nuts, real juices, things that aren't aids, things that don't have, denso proxyhydroxypine. And so, I mean, I wish I were joking, but, I see kids going into these little corner markets and like I said, literally in some cases, gas stations to get their breakfast on their way to school, things like that. So the SCORE, WSCR, where I have done some work many, many years ago, Danny Parkinson and along with the other non-for-profits I mentioned have, to this point, raised over $500,000, about $664,000 towards the construction of a permanent full-service facility for Austin Harvest, which has previously been a little pop-up, like a thing that sort of moves around and, as you mentioned, was tinted pop-up store on the side of a liquor store, and that got destroyed during the looting, during the unrest that took place in Austin previously. He normally works, he works more than 4 hours a day, but he's normally on air 4 hours a day in the 2 to 6. And he just decided that he was tired of it, for lack of a way of putting it. And so he started at, I guess, 9 a.m., or actually, I guess it ended, 9 to 9, I guess 9 a.m. to 9 a.m. And first of all, I'm proud. When I first met Danny, this is almost 20 years. Wait. Yeah. Geez. Yeah, almost 20 years ago. Like 19 years ago, maybe. And he was I think he might still been an intern. And so he's come a long way. And like I said, I'm really happy and proud that this happened. I'm sad also that it had to happen. And I'm super happy that it got picked up by so many other people and that it essentially went, as you know, you're in, Southern California, so it clearly went nationwide. I know LeVar Burton is amongst the people who have donated and retweeted. Obviously, the station itself hopped on it. Nick Wright, who's a national voice, got involved. I think he donated and retweeted. Pretty much everybody who could, or a lot of people who could, tried to amplify and or retweet it. And it's the kind of thing that I'm just super happy. Like I said, I'm sad that it came to this. In a country like the United States, we should not have places where entire neighborhoods filled with human beings cannot get decent, healthy food to eat. Like, that shouldn't happen here, right? We're not. We always look at like the South Sudan and all these other places and say, "Oh, wow, look how sad it is." Well, it's not just here. Obviously, this is where it's getting a lot of attention, but there's lots of other places where people can't get decent food to eat. They're paying, and somebody did a great thing about how expensive it is to be poor. They pay more for less, right? They're getting lower quality and smaller amounts of food because you can't buy in bulk from these places because they have small inventories. The food is usually older, close to expiration, in some cases past expiration. The stores very often don't have great cleanliness. So there is a desperate need, and Danny Parkins, to his credit, saw this need, stepped in, and decided to address it. But yes, it is a problem. And hopefully we'll have a long-term solution come out of this.
Everyone says that there's a problem, but I remember welfare cheese. So there's the progress. Everybody. Y'all show. So, let's talk to Smith. Before I go out in this association. The Raiders defensive tackle, Mr. Reddish, came out, and in one play, his jersey set record sales.
Yep.
Do you remember a family like the Sims?
Yeah, well, I was, as you know, very involved in all things draft, and I was at the combine the year that Michael Sams was going through the pre-draft process. He had actually a very poor combine, as memory serves. I think he ran in the, high 4.8s or low 4.9s, which is not great for a smaller defensive end who might even have had to transition to playing outside linebacker in some systems. His agilities were, average. His vertical was below average. His bench reps weren't anything to write home. It was just a bad combine for Michael Sam. Now, was that the only reason that, things didn't happen for him? I would say it's probably not the only reason, but if he had a great combine, he had a good actual, what's what I'm looking for? A good actual, career. I think 3 of his teammates from that same defensive line group got drafted. He did not. He was an undrafted free agent. Spent time in the Rams camp, and I think he got into somebody else's camp briefly as well, if memory serves, but didn't last anywhere. I can't. It may have been Dallas. Wherever it was, he was there for it seemed like a matter of days, and then was gone again. And what I can say is, well, if he'd been an exceptional athlete and had great showings, who knows, right? We would have had a much different story to tell. But you can't be marginal if you're going to be a player that's seen as one that might cause additional quote unquote problems or challenges to the roster, to the locker room or whatever it is. It takes a strong culture to absorb any player who's seen as different, quite frankly. So if a player learns differently, as some players do, we've had players that we have documentation had learning disabilities. A young man from Ball State, quarterback named Nate. What was his last name? Smith? I can't remember his last name, but he struggled just because the way his particular learning disability worked, it was hard for him to memorize text, words. And so they had to try to transcribe or change everything over to images to try to help him. I know that Vince Young was diagnosed with some sort of learning disability. And there have been, obviously if you're not playing quarterback, it's maybe a little bit less of an issue, but there have been several players who've had learning disabilities. But it takes a stronger team culture to absorb that. There have been some players who, who have anxiety disorders or, a variety of things. And you need a stronger team. Obviously it was after his playing career, but Charles Haley was finally diagnosed with bipolar disorder, right? And Brandon Marshall, during his playing career, was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. So when a person does have anything that makes them different, whether it be something that, is minor, and some of the things are not, or something that, this is something that I see as minor, but it could be a big deal to some, I guess. The fact is that Carl Nassib is a good, not great, but a good football player. And there's enough in him. He's young enough, right? And he's a good enough player that this should not hurt his career. And as we've just witnessed, he got a lot of support. But that often happens on the front end, like when things first happen. And then later, after the attention's kind of died down, we'll see. But hopefully, and of course the Raiders have broken a lot of ground, right? They had, the first black head coach, the first Latino or Latinx head coach. They had the first woman executive the first woman executive in a, place in a high position, right? In Amy Trask. So the Raiders have made a lot of football history, and this is just another part of that. But I hope that Carl Nassib gets to continue to grow and develop as a player. He's still a fairly young player. like I said, he's a good player and not a great one. So I don't think he's going to become a star because of this or anything like that. I think that there'll be this initial burst of publicity and everything like that, and then occasionally, maybe during Pride Week or things like that, it might come back up again. But I think it'll be allowed to sort of, it'll settle in and be not so much a story pretty soon.
Do you think that can see a difference in air?
A difference in what?
Yeah, between the time when he came out.
Oh, era. I mean, it's not a big span of time, but it's enough difference in time. I think the Michael Sam experience helped a little bit in that it wasn't handled incredibly well, to be perfectly honest, before. And like I said, Michael Sam having such a poor pre-draft process essentially let the league off the hook in that since he didn't, even though he's a fairly productive college player, he didn't look like a guy who's going to transition into being a really great pro. So that was part of it, and Nassib is a better player in terms of certainly at the professional level. But the other thing is that I think the general awareness that, one, there are people who are non-binary, who are gay, who are bisexual, who are, lesbian, who are all these things, transgender, all those things are, I think the recognition that they are people and that they are here and they're not going anyplace, right? I think that has settled in more because Michael Sam wasn't that long ago, but I think consciousness has been raised a little bit since then and awareness has been raised a little bit since then. So I would say more it's that this is a better player, first of all, right? And since we found out after he'd been in the league for a while, as opposed to finding out as he's entering into the pre-draft process, there's so much scrutiny of players when they're entering this process anyway, right? I mean, they are thoroughly studied, obviously as athletes, but as people, especially players that have a chance to go reasonably early, which prior to the pre-draft process, some people thought Michael Sam might go in the top 100. And, obviously, like I said, he fell all the way out of the draft itself because he had such a poor pre-draft process. And I could see how the disclosure of his sexuality may have, depressed his draft stock a little bit as well. But since Nassib went through this process without any of this disclosure, and we found this out after he was a young but established player, I think that took some of the heat off in terms of there'll be so much more heat on him if he was also trying to enter the league at the same time. But I'm happy for him in that so far it looks like now who knows what people say behind closed doors, but at least no one is openly who's connected with the league. I mean, some fans or whatever, and there's always people with something to say, but no one connected with the league so far has had a negative reaction.
That's true. Like I said, I kind of think that's a different in the attitude of this era of players. And the says that this is the rapid situation. We can hear that in the locker room with the units, and it's very hard not to talk about the guy that's not there unless he's listening. Do you find palatable Packers who talk about the absence of Aaron Rodgers, especially the receivers?
Well, okay, so I'll go back to something we share, right? We both share a background where people say, here's the mission, go accomplish the mission. We don't really care about these other things because is it mission critical? No. You have everything that's mission critical, go get your mission done. Not to compare football to that because it's a different level of expectation and intensity, but you get all of these people focused on whatever the job is, right? And you isolate them, at least if not physically, then mentally, from the rest of the world, the bubble, as I've referred to it before in the past. And inside the bubble, things that you would think would be impossible to say and believe and really, buy into, people manage to talk themselves into. Whether they truly believe it or not is a better question. It's a question that I can't ask. I can ask it, but it can't really be answered. Only be answered by someone who's actually in the bubble. But it's always in the back of people's minds, whether they're talking about it or not, James. I mean, I'm sure they don't walk into the quarterback meeting and say, calling roll here, and then, not here. I mean, there's no way. He's essentially in the pantheon, right, of Packers players. He's on their Mount whatever, Mount Cheesehead or whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's Brian Bartlett's star, right? You've got Brett Favre. You can kind of throw Reggie White in there, though he only spent a couple of years with the team, but he's a Packers fans, grew to love him very quickly and have him up there. And some of those guys from maybe the Lombardi era, some other of those guys, like maybe a guy like Fuzzy Thurston or Jerry Kramer, or I guess Paul Hornung would probably be the guy. Call Paul Hornung. But there's a handful of guys, right? And Aaron Rodgers was never beloved in the same sense, partially because he didn't feel like, one of their guys the same way, right? He's, this guy who's kind of standoffish to some extent, and he's highly bright, and he knows that he's smart. And people don't like when smart people know that they're smart and let other people know how smart they are. People don't like that, James. They don't like it when people let them know how smart they are. So they've sort of they forgave him or whatever. They sort of overlooked some of these things, how prickly or whatever and highly intelligent and from California. They kind of overlooked all that stuff to some extent, as long as he just was a good soldier, went out and played. The issue is that when the team made it clear that, right, they were getting ready to, another year or two, we need to, move this thing along. And he's like, well, wait, I'm playing at the highest level of my career. I'm as good as I've ever been, maybe better than I've ever been. Could I see how this turns out? And they're like, eh. So I understand Aaron Rodgers being a little peeved at the thought that people are, trying to pull down the curtain while he's still playing it. I mean, who's playing better? I mean, what quarterback was better than him last year? I mean, you could throw one or two guys in the same conversation, but no one was playing better. So there is that sense of, what are we doing here? But once again, the team has to always think a year ahead or 2 years ahead. They can't just say, you're still great, excellent, we're just going to have a bunch of guys who are basically just, tomato cans around you in the quarterback room, so there's no threat to you. But we've seen how that ends, when a team doesn't have, the succession plan in place. So I understand the team wanting to get that in place. But, right, yes, that'd be an example. Yes, a perfect example. And we've seen it happen with other teams, too. I mean, it happened with, the original TB12, right? They thought they were getting another year out of Bradshaw. Bradshaw said he's going to come back for another year. Then he realized, I can't do this anymore. And then we wandered around in the forest for a while behind people like Cliff Stout and Mark Malone, and it was a dark, dark time. So I remember. I haven't forgotten. And, we might be setting ourselves up for another similar experience, James. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. So I completely get that. I completely get that teams always want to be ahead of the curve. I mean, even with Jimmy Garoppolo, right? It looks like they might have been 6 or 7 years ahead. But the Patriots were thinking we have to have a plan. And then Tom Brady was like, no, you don't. I'm going to play until I'm 50 or whatever it is. But, I mean, you have to remember, one, this is a new thing, right? Quarterbacks can play longer now than ever before for a bunch of reasons. One is, guys don't have an off-season job selling insurance or working for Anheuser-Busch because they don't need to. They're rich now. But so you don't have an off-season job. Your job now should be to stay in football shape pretty much all the time. You can have some time with your family, but still to stay in shape. And the other big difference, of course, is nobody is hitting you in the base of your spine with a truck transaxle. 2 or 3 times a game, right? That's gone. You don't see that. You don't see guys with blood streaming down their faces like you see Unitas, or Y.A. Tittle. All these guys used to have their push their nose back into place and go back out and play. That's not happening anymore so much. So there's no longer that physical toll to the same extent that's taken on quarterbacks, and they're in better shape for the most part than ever before. The issue with a guy like Aaron Rodgers, who is looking at what Tom Brady's doing, and just as all of us are looking at what Tom Brady's doing, is one, he's thinking, why can't I do that? I could do that, right? I could play at a high level in 43, 44. And that could be possible. I mean, once again, he's a guy who is he's meticulous about preparation. He stays in good shape. But the Packers, they don't want to commit to him, right? They essentially said, we had a wonderful marriage, but it's time for us to marry a new, younger bride. I mean, that's essentially what they're saying. And it'd be great if you played great for one more year, right? That'd be awesome. Why'd you go and be great for one more year? And he's like, I don't know if I want to do that for you guys. So you can then just replace me the next year. I get what both parties are doing. Like, it makes 100% sense to me. But there's no way that people aren't talking about it. They might be talking openly about it. They might be talking about it in the locker room. But, on their drive home, they're talking about it with their wives or whatever. I mean, I promise you, they're talking about someplace, James. Maybe not in the facility, right? Because when you're in the facility, you're so focused on, what do I have to do here today, right? There's not a lot of time to, talk about anything, really. These guys live in the bubble. But on the drive home, while you're in bed, while you're having dinner, yeah, of course it comes up. Like, you can't not talk about it. It's just that you block it out while you're at work. That's probably the most honest way I could think of to put it.
Kind of like carrying your home, but man, you see how kind of do that with you. Yeah. What do you think has a bigger impact on everything?
Well, I mean, this comes down to offensive philosophy and not so much the player. The Giants, if they're smart, are going to hand the ball to Saquon Barkley a lot. Partially because there's a sort of an expiration date on running backs. And some people say, we don't want to use them too much. I mean, frankly, I think of a running back as a 5 or 6 year investment. And you should get everything you can out of that investment. And I'm all for player safety and things like that. But it doesn't make sense not to. If he's the best player on your team, at least on offense, and I think Saquon Barkley is the best player on that team, at least on offense, then you have to ride him. And if that team's going to be any good at all, they probably won't be. But if they are, they're going to have to give him the ball a lot, James. And I mean a lot. I'm talking 24 to 30 touches between catches and rushing pretty much every game. Somewhere in that range of 24 to 30 for them to have a chance to win a decent number of football games. So there's no way that Odell Beckham Jr. is getting 24 to 30 touches. I mean, this is easy. Well, next question. You can't get 24 to 30 touches to Odell. Yep. Yeah, so I'm saying total touches. There's going to be some games where they have over 30, but he's going to be between 24 and 30. I would think, unless he gets hurt, is the only way he ends up not getting between 24 and 30 touches per game, pretty much every game. So, and like I said, it's not even a fair question, really. The answer should definitely be Saquon Barkley. That offense, probably the next best player on offense is what, maybe Darius Slayton? I mean, Evan Ingram has been an okay player, but not exactly dominant at tight end. Their other wide receivers are complementary type players. They don't have a number one, really. I mean, Slayton's, I guess, is close to it. as they have. Their other running backs are, guys who can spell Saquon Barkley, but no one's a threat to really cut into his carries. He's going to have to largely carry that offense, while Odell's part of a much bigger ensemble. So, yeah, that's, like I said, very easy question.
There's a lot to say about the reason wasn't if we came to a person that had a police
Swiss Army knife, or whether he's just going to be a gift. What do you think?
Well, first of all, he has to make the team. But assuming he makes the team, he's going to be a reserve, right? First of all, he's an older player making this transition. So usually when a player is making a transition switch, he's doing a position switch. He's doing it at the beginning of his pro career. You don't usually see guys, if he'd been in the league all this time. We're talking about a guy being like in his 11th season or something in the league. When's the last time you saw a guy who was in his early 30s switch positions, right? I mean, I've seen guys.
34.
Yeah, okay, so middle 30s. So think about the last time. I mean, I've seen guys move from left tackle to left guard, or left tackle to right tackle, or things like that. That's about as close. And sometimes a guy will move from corner to safety late in his career as a defensive back. That's about as close as I can think of. I've never seen a guy at this point in his career, make the move from quarterback to tight end. There's been a few guys who've made the transition successfully, and the most recent is Logan Thomas, but he did it when he was like 24. So slightly different deal here, doing it about 10 years later. So once again, easy question, James. He's going to be a backup. He's going to sell T-shirts. He's going to make radio appearances and TV appearances and lead the team in prayer before games and that kind of thing. He's going to be basically a playing team chaplain. Basically.
Let's get back to talking about the team was looking forward to the season that we might be looking for that. And losing comparison because supposedly Justin Fields is not going to start for the Bears. But the gentleman that is starting the season is a gentleman that's very familiar with Cincinnati. So I think it's a fair comparison between Andy Dalton and also I see one of those similar symptoms. The Bears but as far as the offensive line, I think it's terrible. Defensive line.
Well, okay. Well, I think Fields will see the field before Haskins will. I think they both will get some time this year. Now, Haskins may get his time mostly in sort of cleanup, end of game, that kind of thing, or, due to injury. I think Fields will eventually take over. I think that the plan, though they aren't disclosing the plan, but I do believe the plan is probably somewhere around the bye week to make the transition. I think he'll be in some, packages as you know, they do with young quarterbacks, particularly young quarterbacks who are very athletic. I think you'll see some time in some specialized, fields packages, maybe in short yardage goal line, other situations where they can utilize all of his abilities, both physically, mentally, and otherwise. And I believe now the only caveat is if Andy Dalton's playing out of his mind. Now, he's not incapable of playing well. He's played very well in the past, but the issue is consistency with him. But if he has, a season for the ages, then they'll wait longer on Fields. But assuming Andy Dalton continues to be Andy Dalton, the Andy Dalton that we normally expect Andy Dalton to be, I think he's the starting quarterback to begin the first part of the season. And like I said, I think around the bye week, they make the transition.
Why don't you think the Steelers, in particular, have not had a projected transition from starting quarterback to second straight quarterback? In other words, we tried some running back last year. Didn't work out. We tried that. We tried it with the last year. Now we have the game match the two.
Well,
That Arthur Jones has the talent. So, what do you think that it was just a bad thing? Because we've seen the same thing that happened to some of our other black quarterbacks, especially where you think it's because of them having leash.
So there's a lot of things to be addressed. But I'll start with the fact that the quarterback position has always been a very difficult one to scout, to coach, and to develop. That's always been true since the very beginnings of most teams adopting, going from the single wing to, the T formation that pretty much everyone was using by, the late 1950s. So that means that we have 60 plus years of data that show that quarterbacks are difficult to find, difficult to develop, and difficult to identify, quite frankly. So when we look at Josh Dobbs, Mason Rudolph, Devlin, a.k.a. Duck Hodges, and various other quarterbacks that have come and gone in the who am I forgetting from Oklahoma? Landry. What was Landry's last name? Landry.
Jones?
Yes, right. So they've had several quarterbacks that have backed up Ben Roethlisberger in his time, and they have been almost uniformly bad. At one point they brought in Michael Vick. I mean, they've done a lot to try to, whatever Ben is hurt, to sort of stem the tide, to sort of plug the gap. But none of them have looked like quarterbacks of the future. So part of it is scouting, obviously. They have not done a great job of identifying a viable young quarterback, which is why they've clung so tenuously to. They still have Ben Roethlisberger starting because the other options are terrible, James. So when you're choosing between possibly bad and definitely terrible, go with possibly bad over definitely terrible. Like that's not a difficult decision to make. So they have to get better at, one, scouting the quarterback position. They've not done well since Ben Roethlisberger at finding another quarterback. So that, once again, why he's so safe. Two, you have to be better at developing quarterbacks. Once again, we talked about Tom Brady. He's a fantastic example of what quarterback development looks like. He was a marginal prospect. It wasn't like the world was clamoring to get him, but he was somehow, was cloaked so they couldn't see how good he was. They made it to the pick 199. No, everybody thought he was a marginal. I mean, I was defending him back on the old, BBSs, the old bulletin board systems, and I was defending him on the old War Room BBS back in the day, saying I thought, he could be a less athletic version of Brad Johnson. I thought that was most likely. Or if everything went right, I remember writing this, that if everything went right, he could become a Steve Bartkowski type, right? I remember thinking that if everything went right, that could happen for him. Obviously, he's exceeded everyone's expectations. But part of that is development. He was not a fantastic prospect. It's easy to forget. We all sort of look at the pick 199, but that wasn't crazy. He was a marginal prospect. He was a guy who lacked athletic ability, had to fight to keep his job from Drew Henson when he was at Michigan. He went to a great situation, a team that was willing to, one, carry 4 quarterbacks, which nobody does. He was inactive his whole rookie year, but he learned a lot. He watched, all the other quarterbacks on the roster, including, obviously Bledsoe, but also what's his name? Damon Ewert, right? The other quarterbacks on the roster. And he watched those guys. He learned how to be a pro. He learned what things worked and which things didn't work. And then he prepared like a crazy person. He would show up early. He would stay late. So a lot of it, the success belongs to him as well. But a lot of the things that the Patriots put in place helped him to develop. Not every team understands how. Most teams, I should say not every team, most teams do not know how to develop young quarterbacks, James. Most teams, the guy has to come ready to go or not. There's a handful of teams I can point to. It's like, okay, well, the Chiefs understand it, right? A few teams have shown they actually understand developing young quarterbacks. The Eagles look like they did, and then they lost Frank Reich, and then they lost their young quarterback in terms of, or he started to look lost once Frank Reich was gone. So it is not easy. A handful of teams actually get how to develop young quarterbacks, James, unless they come ready to go. So if you get Russell Wilson, he's just ready to go, right? If there's 3 guys that you get, they're just ready to go. Justin Herbert was just ready to go. It didn't matter where he went to some extent. I'm sure they've done some things to sort of polish him and develop. Don't get me wrong, but I think good team, bad team, where he would have gone, he would have showed up and showed out. So I'm trying to think of other teams that really understand. I mean, we'll see if we're about to get the verdict for Arizona if they understand developing a young quarterback. They're in the process of doing it. Looks like they might be successful in it. But it's a short list of teams that really know how to develop a guy who's not already a pro, basically, when he shows up to camp. Yep. You talk about the draft itself? Oh, the first player taken. Oh, okay. So we're on to the NBA draft. I got it. Okay. I mean, there's a few players who I think have a chance, but my assumption is that Cade Cunningham, barring something unforeseen, will be the first player chosen. Well, he's a good fit anywhere. I mean, if not, then you're doing something wrong. I mean, there's certain players that you make it work, right? I mean, Cade Cunningham, the player he reminds me of is a more explosive version of Sean Elliott. And Sean Elliott was a really good basketball player. It was a really, really good basketball player. Now he has trouble staying healthy, but he reminds me a great deal. And I mean, you have to listen to offers. Especially when your team is rebuilding, you have to be willing to listen to offers. So if somebody blows your mind in terms of what they're willing to offer you, you have to listen to them. But my belief is that short of some historic haul, they're gonna go ahead and take Cade Cunningham. You said better than who? Oh, it was the East. Oh, that's an interesting question. I won't say the East is better than the West in terms of young talent, because there's a lot of great young players out West. I mean, if you've been developing.
Some of the guys that wrote, for instance, Giannis, they've seen experience afterwards.
Oh, I see what you're saying now. Well, I mean, but look at the Suns. I mean, that's a really good young team, mostly built around homegrown talent, with a sprinkling of guys they've gotten via, free agency or trades or whatever. But here's what I will say, and once again, the NBA is different from the NFL for the most part, with the exception of maybe a couple of guys who are sort of projects. But most of the guys that you draft in the NFL, you're expecting them to not only just make the team, but to contribute. There's a couple of exceptions, but if you draft 7 guys, 5 of them you expect to contribute, or else you blew it, right? If they don't start, they should at least be contributing, whether it be on special teams or as a reserve, and you want to at least get 3 or 4 starters, or else you're doing it wrong. Now, the NBA they'll draft guys who are in, Mauritania or, the Czech Republic, who won't even play in America for 3 or 4 years in some cases. They know those guys are going to play overseas for a while. They might spend a year or 2 in the G League. You might see them that was the Spurs thing, was, we'll see you in 3 years, here's your Spurs gear. This is just for show. See you in 3 years, enjoy playing in Greece, it's different. It's a different mindset in terms of development, because you're taking players who are 18, 19 years old, some of whom really don't have a real idea of how to play basketball, at least not at the professional level. Now, there are guys who are great exceptions, and obviously we're seeing some of those great exceptions. Luka Doncic started playing with professionals when he was, 13 or whatever? So a little different situation with him. But the NBA they're like buying a penny stock, right? They're hoping it returns on their investment eventually. When you're, especially in the early rounds of an NFL draft, you're going for blue chip stocks where you get guaranteed dividends. You're not hoping this player one day contributes. This guy better play right away, or you're getting fired. So I would say that there are teams on the West who have done a very good job of developing young players. Like I said, the Suns are a fantastic example. Portland to a slightly lesser extent, but still doing a pretty good job of. They've got maybe a little bit more of a mix of guys they've gotten from outside, but there's a good number of homegrown players on that team. Dallas is, nucleus is homegrown guys. The Jazz, the nucleus of that team is homegrown guys. So on the East side, we'll see what happens with the Magic. They're obviously a long-term project. The 76ers, a mix, but a decent number of homegrown players. Now, we don't know how far that homegrown talent will ever take them, but that team's got a good amount of it. Celtics, seem like they're. I mean, there's a couple of homegrown guys, but there's a lot of those guys came from other teams. I'd have to go back and look to be. But it seems to me that roster is like 50%, or maybe even slightly more than 50% guys who got their start with somebody else's organization. The Heat they have a couple of young guys, but a lot of older players in Miami who came from all over the place. Toronto, they're fairly young, I guess. But I mean, to me, it seems like the success stories being built around young, homegrown talent are mostly in the West. I mean, we just saw what the Jazz did. We saw, obviously Dallas got eliminated. But we saw what they were able to do, and the Suns are still clicking along. While the best teams in the East, well, I mean, the Bucks are largely homegrown. Obviously less so with some of the other teams I mentioned. So I would still say West more than East so far in terms of showing the better propensity for developing your own homegrown stars.
Still kind of staying in that same vein. When you look at Luka's distaste, that
He
he
doesn't think
doesn't think that his teammates are his equal. He seems to already have that kind of hero complex. Going back to Rose, Skip Bayless is our favorite turn. Do you think that Luka could be a team over in Dallas?
I think that Luka will play out his contract and maybe even sign a short, 1 or 2 year max money extension. And then if obviously it depends what happens at that time, but if things have not coalesced in terms of that team making a deeper move into the playoffs, I think he might move on at that point. Luka will be a historic free agent if he hits free agency. He will see ridiculous amounts of money because he's exactly the kind of superstar who can play with other superstars, right? Some guys aren't a great fit to play with everybody, right? They because they are not complementary players. They are, even though he's a guy that can dominate the basketball, obviously, he's a guy that spends a lot of time with the ball in his hands. He's also a really great distributor. You want the ball in his hands because he's not always going to shoot. He's going to pass as much as he's going to shoot. I mean, he's similar to LeBron in mindset, though he's physically very different. He's not only shorter, but a much less physically, slightly shorter, but a much less physically imposing player, much less explosive kind of player. Even though LeBron's getting older, he still has a great amount of ability to just, fly down on a break or, explode through or over people in a way that Luka cannot. But yeah, I think he plays out his contract, maybe does a short 1 or 2 year max money extension, and then hits the open market.
Who's his face this year?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Well, we talked about some of the guys. I think some of the other guys on the show last week threw up people like Jason Kidd. I think Jason Terry's name got bandied about. I think I might have thrown out Mo Cheeks. Becky Hammond, I understand, is a finalist. That would be cool. And she really would understand a player with Luka's mindset. She was a tremendous pass-first player in her days, though she could shoot. Actually, she was a gunner, too. I mean, she could do a little bit of everything. She was a pretty good two-way kind of lead guard, I guess. I mean, she wasn't a pure point guard because she shot a lot. But she'll understand helping that kind of player to get maximized. I think all the players we named, and probably players, all the coaches we named, and probably some people we're forgetting, should probably be in the hunt or in the mix. Cheeks probably won't be, but he should be. I think people are sleeping on him. Who else should be mentioned? Probably someone I'm forgetting about. It used to be people would always bring up one or both of the Van Gundys, but I don't think either of them are in the running. Now, if you wanted to bring someone out of the booth, I would go after Mark Jackson. If you wanted to pull a guy out of the booth, that's the guy I'd be going after. He was instrumental in developing a team filled with young players. He was instrumental in helping to bring along that Golden State team before, he gets the shove. After getting them to the 50-point mark and becoming a playoff team, they move on from him and then bring in Steve Kerr. Now, I'm not suggesting he would have gotten as much out of the team as Steve Kerr, but it seemed unfortunate that this, pretty good young black coach gets pushed out of the way to make room for, Steve Kerr.
Interesting what you bring up Steve Kerr, because Steve Kerr says that KD is more gifted in play. So, yes, you ask you, what talent is a gift.
Well, see, I guess it depends on how someone's defining gift. For me, the terms are synonymous, so I don't really draw a distinction between the two. Here's what I will say. Michael Jordan was a better defender. I don't think anyone will dispute that. I think Durant is the better pure shooter. I don't think anyone would dispute that. I think the difference is that, one, with the exception of that season early in his career when he broke his foot, other than that, Jordan was darn near bulletproof through the middle of his. Well, he said it gets into some time for baseball, but in terms of injury, he had one essentially major injury in his entire playing career. And for Durant, it's been a struggle much of his career. Not a bunch of injuries, but lots of little nagging injuries. And, of course, one so serious one when he tore the Achilles. But he's not as physically powerful, though he's taller than Michael. Michael, particularly once he started, really hitting, he's one of the first guys to really hit the weights, along with, Karl Malone and a few others. And I guess it goes back to Kermit Washington in the 70s. But he was sort of alone. He would be alone in the weight room. Guys who would say, you enjoy that. I'm going to get, cigarettes and bourbon or whatever. Guys didn't really take conditioning quite as seriously in that era, but Kermit Washington was sort of an early proponent of weight training. But once Michael got serious about that, he was already an incredibly explosive athlete, once in a millennium kind of athlete. But once he got physically stronger, at least in part due to dealing with the bad boys, right? Once again, shout out to Demetrius Verges. But it was due to the physical pounding, the getting pushed around basically three seasons in a row or whatever by Detroit, or two, where he finally said, I'm fed up with this. And that was a bunch of things changed. He became more vocal as a leader. He started hitting the weights, a bunch of other things to try to deal with them. So Kevin Durant, famously had trouble getting up 185 pounds once, right? And I'm 53 years old. I'll turn 54 in September. I'm not really as strong as I used to be, but I could get up 185 pounds more than once with not going to say little to no effort. It takes some effort, but now obviously my arms aren't as long, but I have long arms for my height. I've stood, behind a friend of mine who's 6'5", and our fingertips, were basically at the same place because I have long arms for my height. But the point is that, in terms of physical ability, there's only been a handful of players that are even in the same category. David Thompson, a handful of others of the same category as Michael Jordan, right? A handful. Kevin Durant is not as physically gifted as Michael Jordan. He is a better, pure, natural shooter. He can shoot from virtually any place on the floor and have a really good chance of it going down. Michael came into the league as a dunker who had a mid-range game, and then developed a post-up game and developed a perimeter shot in the second half of his career, as he became a more complete player. Durant could always shoot from the outside. Going back to high school and AAU, he always had great shooting touch. So I'm going to say that Michael is the more physically gifted or physically talented or whatever you want to call it, and that Durant has a very high level of skill and is a much better shooter.
Just the observation.
When you
you look at Kevin Durant,
you look
you look
at
at
James
James
Harden,
Harden,
you
you
look
look
at
at
Russell
Russell
Westbrook.
Westbrook.
Do
Do
you
you
think
think
that
that
those
those
guys
guys
could
could
have
have
taken
taken
a
a
physical
physical
penalty
penalty
that
that
Michael
Michael
Jordan
Jordan
took
took
during
during
his
his
career?
career?
Well, I mean, the question answers itself, James. They haven't managed to take the non-physical pounding of now. So what are we talking about, James? If those guys can't stay healthy playing basketball now, where almost no one ever touches you, what are we doing? Next question.
It was really sad.
I won't go so far as to say that because I mean, it's grueling. There's a lot of travel, a lot of practicing. I get it, and Westbrook works hard on his body, but he is a guy that also asked a lot of his body. He has very
Michael Jordan took a bus to baseball
Oh, I get it. I mean, I'm not letting those guys off the hook. Don't get me wrong. I mean, these guys couldn't handle. I mean, good lord. Ugh. Harden would be
games. Being on the road will
right. Exactly. So my point is that Harden probably would have stayed an instant offense guy, right? He would have been a taller Vinnie Johnson if he played in 30 years ago, 40 years ago. He would never become a full-time starter because, one, he doesn't ever play defense, and guys who didn't ever play defense couldn't be full-time starters in the old days, James. So he would have always been a quote-unquote instant offense guy. That would have been what James Harden always was in his career, just like guys like Vinnie Johnson were. So he would have had a very different career in the old days. Durant would have struggled to find a place, but I think would have eventually. He would have, frankly, he would have had to bulk up in the old days, James. Finally, somebody, he played for Detroit in the old days. He'd be like, okay, son, we love your game, but come back 225 pounds next year. Come back 230, whatever it is next year, because this isn't going to work. We need you to get a little bigger, stronger. Westbrook is the one who I think would have been. Now, once again, he would have had to change his game to some extent, but he's the one who I think would have been just fine in whatever era. He in fact, to some extent, with the game being so 3-point centered, and he's not that kind of shooter, though he can hit 3-pointers, but he's not great at it. I think he would have been better if in an era where they didn't stress the 3-pointer so much, and he would have let him stay the slasher and the mid-range guy that he really is cut out to be, as opposed to putting up threes. So he would have been, I think, fine in whatever era. I think that, as I said, that Durant would have been good once he put on another 12, 15 pounds of muscle. And then Harden, like I said, he would have been, especially on a good team. On a good team, he's not a starter, James, in the old days. On a good team, in the old days, if he's playing for the Lakers in the Showtime era, he's a guy that's, coming on that second unit, right, with, Mitch Kupchak or, Jamal Wilkes or whatever. He's or Norm Nixon or whatever. Those guys are in that second unit. Michael Thompson, right? He's in that second unit putting up shots, right? Which he can always do because he's a scorer, but he would not have done as well because the game wouldn't have allowed him to play as much.
Durant, I know that Scottie Pippen.
Well, I mean, Scotty completely remade his body. Scotty came into the league at 205 or something and was 239, towards the end of his time with the Bulls. And once again, he was working out with Michael, right? I mean, I tracked Scotty's career from going all the way back to Central Arkansas. And, I saw his body change. In fact, his physical change was even more dramatic than Michael's because he was skinnier, at least at first, than Michael was. And then his body, I mean, he looked like an NFL tight end almost by the end of his career.
Yeah, because he was really skinny.
Mm-hmm.
Rick Carlisle's going back to the Pacers. And I'm going to especially,
I mean,
what's the
the second tier and the rest
Well, he likes it there. I mean, I think it's literally as I know. I mean, it sounds funny, but I think it's literally as simple as that, James. I think he liked it there. I think. Well, I think once again, I think it's that simple. I think that he regrets having left. I think you've heard people say, was it Joni Mitchell, right, in Big Yellow Taxi, right? Some don't always seem to go. You don't know what you've got till it's gone. I think he only realized later that that's where he probably wanted to be all along. I think that during his time with Dallas, he enjoyed parts of it, but I think he spent the whole time, or much of the time, thinking, man, I wish I were back in Indianapolis. And now he is. Huh. Well, I mean, a coach by himself doesn't bring a championship in any sport, James. Not in hockey, not in baseball, not in football, not in basketball. A coach can help you, right? In the NFL, a really great coach is worth 2 or 3 games, right? Instead of going, 7-10, you go 10-7, right? That's what a great coach can do for you. In the NBA, a great coach is worth probably 9 wins, right? Instead of going, 54-28, you go, 61-21, right? Or something like that. In hockey, I can't remember how many games they play in a season, but, once again, 7 or 8 wins. In baseball, a great manager is probably worth 12 out of they have 162 games. So instead of going, 80-82, you go 92-70. That's what a great manager or a great coach can do for you. But championships are won by players. I mean, I hate to, put a damper on the festivities, but players win championships, especially in the NBA. In the NBA, I mean, let's be honest. On the last year's Lakers team, if you had replaced their head coach with, let's just say, a bottle of bleach, do you think it would have made that much of a difference, James, if Coach Clorox was there on the bench? I think the Lakers still would have won the championship with Coach Clorox. In the NBA particularly, it is incredibly player-driven. So if you get the right players, you have a very good chance of winning a championship. If you don't, it doesn't matter who your coach was. It could be, you could have a staff that had Phil Jackson, Red Auerbach, and who's the third? I don't know. Popovich could be the head coach and the 2 assistants. And if your players aren't that good, you're not going to win anything. The NBA particularly, right? I mean, it's true in every league, but the NBA particularly is won by the players.
It's interesting that you say that because we have a coach who takes a lot out of that. One, Doc Rivers. First two, the Clippers. Now we're living with the 76. So, does that stop coaching with the first room? Or do his players just start playing in the fourth quarter?
Well, I watched the games, and Doc's not doing anything different in the fourth quarter. I mean, for those who have somehow forgotten, he's won championships before. It's the players. I don't know what else to tell people. Like, especially in the NBA. It's true in every sport, but it's the truest in the NBA that championships, success at the highest level in the NBA is always about the players. Even with Red Auerbach, right? Look, I mean, his teams were stupid loaded. The great Lakers teams. I mean, Pat Riley's a really great coach, but I promise you, they're not winning anything if not for, Magic Johnson and Michael Cooper and Sam Perkins and Big Game James and, various points, people like Norm Nixon and Derek Fisher. Derek Fisher was later. But my point is that it's about players. It's always been about players. If you take away James Worthy and, okay, I'll let you keep Magic, but let's just take away Kareem and James Worthy, right? and replace them with guys who are just average. They're still a good team, but they're not winning all those championships. It's always players. It's always players. It's, like I said, true in every sport, but it's the truest in the NBA that it's the players that win and lose games. Sorry, what about Ben Simmons? Well, the Timberwolves. What is punishment? No, let me say this. The Timberwolves, who have...
How do you punish a guy who don't have those 5 points? You might be punishing.
Well, I mean, the point I'm making is that 5 points in the fourth quarter for Ben Simmons is a pretty good night. Have you not watched Ben Simmons play basketball? I mean, if you multiply that by the number of quarters, that's 20 points. 20 points is a great night for Ben Simmons. I mean, he's not a scorer. I mean, I think we should have known this before. He wasn't a great scorer in college. He wasn't a great he scored back when he played back home in Australia. He scored a little bit more just because, frankly, the level of competition. But he's not a scorer. He's a poor shooter with exceptionally bad confidence on top of it. So when you take a guy who doesn't have great scoring fundamentals, right, and you add to it that his confidence is very shaky, that's not a great combination when it comes to scoring, period, in an AAU game, let alone in the NBA. So, sure, Timberwolves, Heat, I mean, pick a place, whatever. The point I'm making is it has to be a team where they are fine with essentially a guy who's a primary ball handler who does not have the ability to score. If you're okay with that, if you have enough scoring, I mean, the Nets would make perfect sense. That way you take some of the dribbling, and all that stuff, some of that load off of Kyrie and Harden. Now they're just both freed up just to think about scoring, right? Because Ben Simmons is not going to be thinking about scoring. He's going to be thinking about getting the ball. Really, I'm only half joking, but that would be the ideal situation, right? He plays defense, which kind of sort of makes up for Harden. So you throw Harden out there, right, along with Durant, Kyrie, and Westbrook. And now those guys don't have to think about handling the ball. It takes some of that defensive pressure off because he's a very good defender. And now he doesn't worry about scoring because those guys are going to take all the shots, right? That would be a great situation for him. I don't think it's going to happen, but that would be a great situation. You can go to a team where there's no pressure, where there's a bunch of leaders, and in the words of Kyrie Irving, we have several coaches. Maybe all of us could be coaches or whatever. So there's no pressure, right? There's lots of leadership. There's lots of scoring. All he does is distribute the rock and play defense. That would be an ideal situation for him.
James Harden catching streaks. He's got a dribble. Kyrie's got to play through a few ways. There's only 24 seconds on the second half.
Yep.
Speaking of another free agent,
it seems like Melo's going on the market. Melo to the Lakers, maybe?
Melo to the Lakers. So when I look at what's wrong with the Lakers, they need to be more athletic. They need guys who are great on-ball defenders, and they need three-point shooting. Which of those things does Carmelo bring? He's not a great three-point shooter. He's definitely not a great perimeter defender. And he doesn't make you younger or more athletic. So, I mean, I don't dislike him as a player, but he doesn't address the real issues that the team has. So, I'd like, I'd be more excited about bringing a guy like Middleton or a guy like, heck, even Jimmy Butler, who's making sort of his way through the NBA now. If I could get Jimmy Butler, now you've got my attention.
Middleton
Well, people have been predicting for 3 years running that Kuzma was gone. Remember back in 2018 where people talked about Kuzma was going to be gone? And then in 2019 they said Kuzma was going to be gone. And then remember in last year people said Kuzma. I mean, at this point, I'm going to stop predicting it because, I mean, maybe then it'll actually happen. He's a better player than people realize, but he looks like a guy who might actually need a fresh start somewhere else. And when I think about, look at the young talent that's passed through this franchise now. Brandon Ingram's doing very well. D'Angelo Russell's doing well for himself. And who's the other one? The other young player that passed through. There's another one. But they've had 3 really good young players who, got their start in Los Angeles and got moved on. The Lakers are sort of like the old Yankees used to be, right? They have good young talent, but they just move them to bring in superstars. And then later they have these superstars on bloated contracts when they're no longer as good as they were when they signed them to the big bloated contract. And now they're in salary cap difficulty. The Lakers are a team that needs, like I said, the 3 things I talked about. They don't have too many great, perimeter defenders, guys who can go out there and give people trouble out up to the 3-point line. Who's the great perimeter defender? They have some shot blocking, but who's the great perimeter defender on this team? Schroeder? I mean, he's a decent defender, but I mean, they could use a really great, tenacious perimeter defender. They could use more 3-point shooting, which is the thing I was talking about when this team first came together years ago when you asked me about them. And then they could use also, a secondary ball handler because Rondo took some of the load off of LeBron, and the guys they have now are not Rondo, right? So that's the other thing I can think of that they could use. But I'm concerned about perimeter defense. I'm concerned about 3-point shooting. A little less so about picking up a secondary ball handler. But this team isn't very explosive and isn't super, super quick once you get beyond a couple of guys on the whole roster. Schroeder's a decent athlete, above average athlete. Davis still, when healthy, is an above average athlete for his position. LeBron is still a very good athlete. LeBron's still an excellent athlete. But he's also getting older. You don't get more athletic as you age. So, like I said, James, they got to fix some of these things.
One of the things that we talked about last week was whether or not Atlanta could play well, so the fact is about coming back because they contract to
Well, we're talking about once again, the trend is now towards young. There's still a few older coaches being, hired, but for the most part, the trend is towards young. You see a lot of younger coaches getting their first shot, their shot to, show what they can do. The facts sort of surrounding this. We make, when I say jokes, we take shots or whatever, to some extent. But, I remember Udoka as a player. Once again, I guess most of the guys who are coaching, I remember as players. So it is sort of jarring to me, to think about some of these players. So, Brad Stevens moves on, or, fails up, as some people have said. And, he's a guy that Greg Popovich had good things to say about when he was on the FIBA World Cup and Team USA coaching staff. He got to know Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, and Jason Tatum as part of that. He spent time with Popovich in San Antonio before moving over to the Nets staff. Was with Brett Brown also for a little bit of time with the 76ers. He played for parts of 7 seasons in the league and was in what they used to call the NBA Developmental League. Played in France and Spain. He was on the Nigerian national team, and he's 43, but he'll turn 44 by the time the next season rolls around. He really understands defense. That's one of the things he's always been known for, both as a player and now as a coach. So if a team wants to get better on defense, that's something he could probably help them do. But yes, I mean, he's a younger coach with strong credentials and a very deserving hire.
Well, let's talk about the playoffs for a bit. Last year, he said, I was just telling you the other night. And that was the biggest George fan. That was the things that I think that makes you an outstanding player. Because you can make your kids right. What shit's a real bad George? That the one that had the great seventh game to bring the Clippers to the playoffs. For the 5 years every time his free throws played to the ball.
Yes. I mean, I think that's the point we were making all along, is that he is all of those things. If he were just one thing, we would stop talking about him. We're talking about him as much, right? Because it would be easily to establish. We would have already established who this guy is and sort of moved on. The fascinating thing about our boy Playoff P, good old PG-13, is that he is capable of being he can play like a top 10 player in the league. Or he can play like a guy that you would be bringing as like an 8th or 9th guy off the bench, to just give you, a body to play some defense. That's the whole point, is that he isn't the same guy from not just one game to the next, but sometimes even one moment to the next. And so it's very frustrating as a coach, and I guess as a fan of the team, I would guess as well, since it's difficult to get a fix on exactly what player is going to show up week in and week out, particularly in the playoffs, which is part of course, why people gave him so much, trouble for the whole nickname he gave himself, because he has not been a consistent playoff performer, and this playoffs has been no different. He has been very up and down.
I see people, CP3 is happening. Right now, I'm going to try to I haven't seen a matchup that I really have this point which is CP3 and Rondo. They seem like they're using Max CP3 coming down the court and trying to keep the ball out of his hands. Do you think that's better tonight? CP3 or Rapid?
Well, I mean, it's pretty clear that Chris Paul is a Hall of Fame player. He's a first ballot Hall of Fame player. And I like Rajon Rondo just fine, but he's not the same level of player. He's not even one tier below a guy like Paul. He's 2 tiers below a guy like Chris Paul. And he's the kind of player that, I mean, he certainly has value to a team, particularly a good team. Don't get me wrong. But he's no longer a high-level, frontline, top 3 or 4 at the point guard position kind of player. If Rondo ever was a guy in the top 3 or 4 type is a question, I guess, at all. But Chris Paul is still a great point guard. I mean, great. So Yeah. Once again, next question. Too easy.
The Steelers are 5.5 titles right now at the point. So, uh, is it Brooms over LA if the Steelers lose tonight? Go down 0-3?
No, I think even if they go down 0-3, they'll win at least one what I call pride game, right? I think they get a pride game and push it to at least 5, maybe even 6. But I went on record a while back saying, Suns Bucks final. I said that a while back. Now we'll see if Atlanta derails me, but I said a while back I saw a Suns Bucks.
I'm so glad that you let me let the coach pass good. Obviously, definitely sketch out, try to catch a play. But the Hawks make the red card or trade Lucas for trade.
You said for the trade?
Yeah,
For Lucas for trade.
That's a good question. I mean, Atlanta is a really well constructed. Once again, we talked about teams that are built primarily around young, homegrown talent. And while once again they're not 100% homegrown, but there's a lot of talent that came up through their system. And while I'm not going to say that they don't need any more talent, they're pretty close to being, there. I mean, Trae Young is a superstar. Bogdan Bogdanovic is a solid player. Chris Dunn is a good player. John Collins is, John Collins. He does John Collins things. Lou Williams is capable of playing like a star at times. Kevin Huerter is a guy that has a very specific set of skills. Clint Capella is a good player, not a great player, but a good one. DeAndre Hunter is a good player. Cam Reddish is a very young player, and they don't quite know what they have in him yet. Oneta Shwangu is another guy who, defense, occasional block shot and some rebounding. Bruno Fernando is a project who may or may not become something. Tony Snell is a guy that never quite became what I thought he might become, but, could give you some minutes. Solomon Hill is probably gone soon, but he's still there now. Either he or Brandon Goodwin, and possibly both, may be moving on soon. But, they've got – here's what I could say they could use. They could use a big man who's a real scorer, an interior threat, to sort of give you that inside-outside thing that some great teams have that they don't have. Their scoring is almost all perimeter. Lou Williams is a terrific shooter, but he's a perimeter guy. He can occasionally slash and things like that, but he mostly plays out there. Gallinari can slash a little bit as well, but he doesn't exactly make his living on the interior, sort of scoring at least. This team is they're sort of like the pre-Durant Golden State Warriors to some extent in the way they're constructed, right? They have their version of Steph. Klay Thompson Lou isn't quite Klay Thompson, but he's close enough, I guess, close-ish. So they do need to bring in probably at least one veteran guy who's a spark plug type. They need to find one or two glue guys and maybe one other, like I said, legitimate interior scorer. But if they might win the championship this year. I don't want to go too far in being critical about a team that has a very good chance to win the championship this year. But they use a little more talent in certain positions, sure. And so if you're talking about making a trade, obviously it depends on who you have to give up. To me, wait, hold on. You said they made the trade?
No,
I'm saying
Oh.
We're going to trade between Atlanta and between Atlanta and the Mavericks. The Mavericks taking Luka.
the Hawks because the Hawks have shot Luke Longley.
Right, right. No, I'm going to say that the Hawks did the right thing. I mean, they might win a championship this year. Like, how would you criticize that?
Well, but remember now, you're picking the Bucks.
Oh yeah, I'm aware that I'm picking the Bucks. I'm just saying that they have a chance. You know, I'm not saying they will. I'm saying they have a chance to win the championship. I still think the Bucks will win it, but I think they have a chance. Is all I'm saying.
Okay, all right, I can understand that.
Atlanta's a really good, mostly homegrown young team. We talk about a team in the East that is largely made of homegrown talent has a chance to win it all. Yeah, Atlanta would qualify.
So, talking about your Bucks, do they have a score? Number four, or are they playing number two by committee?
Yeah, and that's
Can you really depend upon Chris Middleton to give you 20 points a game?
yeah, and that's been my thing. I've been saying last year and again this year is that I mean they could really use a guy like Lou Williams, but the one thing that concerns me about the way that team is put together is they still haven't found exactly who that number two guy is. I mean, Dante DiVincenzo occasionally gets hot and has a good day at the office. Drew Holiday's a really good all-around player, but he's not really a pure scorer. Lopez can knock down shots from the outside. That's kind of it for him. I like Middleton as a player. I just don't think he'd be a better number three option than a number two. I'm going to say that they have their number three and they need the number two. Maybe he comes to the draft next year. Maybe one of the young guys steps up next year. But, yeah, I'm going to go say that, to me, Middleton's like a perfect number three. He should be your third option. Now, he's a guy that's capable of scoring 20 points a game consistently. But, as you just pointed out, not always exactly, the right – you don't always get it when you need it, when you have to have it, right? He's also a guy that has only played a full season twice in his whole career. Well, I mean, I guess, it's only twice. Only twice in his whole career has he managed to play all 82 games. So he's not a guy who's always 100% healthy on top of everything else. But, he's been a 20-point scorer 3 times in his career, including this season. He did it in 17-18, 2017-2018. He did it in 19-20, in 2019-2020, which was last year, and he's done it this year. So I would say he's becoming a little more consistent as a scorer, but still, I would be very excited if he was number 3 and we had at least one other guy, who was the legit number 2. So I'm trying to think of guys who, might become available who become an option. But yeah, it's hard to find that guy. The Klay Thompsons of the world don't usually become available. But yes, if they had a guy like him or a guy like God, who else would be? I mean, like I said, most of the guys I could think of are guys that teams wouldn't let go. It's hard to come by the kind of player that they need.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine. So whatever was going on before, it's over now. I can hear you just fine.
Okay. To me, now, I'm going to give the advantage in coaching. McMillan, since he's has gotten, I don't know what he fed these guys or whatever it is, but, for a team that was only 50-50 at the All-Star break, they've certainly bought into whatever he's putting down. Speed, I'll also give to the Hawks.
Yes.
And, of course, momentum, seeing as how they've been rested. Do you think this is going to be another 7-game series? And if it is, do you think that the Bucks can survive after going 7-7 and then playing the winner of this Lakers Suns. The Clippers. Sorry, the Clippers are up now. I think by 8. But what do you think about that? Do you think that another 7-game series will really be detrimental to the Bucks?
Can they? Yes, they can. I'd say definitely they can. Now, will they is a better question, but yes, they can. Some teams, I won't say that they thrive on it, but I will say that some teams for whatever reason, need a while to settle in and aren't themselves in the first 2 games of a series and then find themselves, around game 3. And it seems like he might be in that kind of vein in terms of, how they play.
I think it's another thing that we should mention, and we talked about this even during the NCAA tournament. Once again, we have an NBA final, and 3 of the coaches are minorities.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it so much easier for the the NBA to sort of adopt the Rooney Rule, and it's so hard for it to be a part of the NFL agenda?
Well, so yeah, the NBA has always been ahead of the NFL in terms of front office and coaching hires for non-whites. So here's the gist of it. There's the barrier to entry for former players to get into coaching in the NBA is frankly lower. I think that while there's some nepotism, it's not quite as prevalent. And I think the last thing is, let's be completely honest, the game is a simpler game. And because of that, there's less of a sense you have to find this guru type, right, in order to win. There have been lots of coaches who were reasonably hands off, right? We just saw what happened with Coach Vogel in Los Angeles. There's some guys who are at least somewhat hands off who still had success. That doesn't happen as much in the NFL, in fact, if ever, because football coaches have to see everything and be involved in everything and design everything and time everything and ask you questions about everything. And like I said, complexity, they worship at the altar of complexity, particularly certain coaches, in the NFL, worship at the altar of complexity, sometimes unnecessarily so, James. So the fact that I, and everyone else knows that players are most responsible for success at that level. While I think people think of the coach-player relationship at the NFL level as being more balanced, which, once again, open for debate, but the perception is that players run the NBA, and I don't think that's entirely incorrect. And so, as an extension, I think a lot of them feel like they should run the team, or once again, come close to it.
I would say that that's reasonable, the assumption. Plus, the racial balance, I think, even though that with the influx of good European players, we might see a change in that. But Bill, we had a good conversation tonight, and as always, military men improvise, adapt, overcome.
Survive, yes.
So, why don't you give us your final thoughts? Right now, things are looking pretty good for the Clippers. But hey, as I said, your final thoughts. 71-56 in favor of the Clippers.
Well, yeah, like I told you, the Clippers going to at least get to 5. So I'm going to open my final thoughts with talking about Rebecca Lynn Hammond, who has played the game at the highest level. She was a person who was a 3-time All-American when she was in college at Colorado State. Played for the San Antonio Stars as well as New York Liberty and the WNBA. She played for the Russian national team and became a naturalized Russian citizen. Played in 2008 and 2012 on their Olympic squad. Has been a NBA assistant coach since 2014. And if she does get a head coaching job in this coaching cycle, which is possible, one is I think that would be a powerful and important thing. Not just because Rebecca Lynn Hammond would get a chance to show whether or not she's capable of doing the job, but also it shows that our society has at least gotten to the point where we don't say you can't do this job because you do not have a penis. I mean, think about what a ridiculous mindset it is to say that someone's, genitals or plumbing or whatever term we're going to use is a determining factor in whether or not they get a job. It's ridiculous. And, someday the NFL will reach this point where a woman has a chance to be an NFL head coach. And I look forward to that day as well. But if indeed Rebecca Lynn Hammond gets a job with one of the available jobs in the NBA, it will change everything forever. This is making obviously history and moving her own career forward. There'll be millions of young women, not just in America, but all around the nation. I mean, all around the world, beyond this nation, all around the world, who will see this example, who will see what's happened, and will say, I don't just have a chance to coach in the WNBA or college basketball or overseas. I have a chance to coach at the highest level of the profession in the United States. And I, for one, am thrilled to see what happens next with her career.
Hey, well, thanks as always, Bill. Look forward to having some of the guys back next week. And you have a great one. And look forward to talking to you maybe in our next inclusion series. So,
All right.
You have a great night. Looking forward to talking to you next week. Have a great weekend.
The pleasure is mine, sir. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend as well. Always a pleasure.
Make sure you tell everybody where they can find you on social media.
Sure. So I am on Twitter pretty much all the time, it seems like, but you can find me either at capital B, capital C, ARROLL, that's at BCarroll138, or you can find me at 11Bravo138, which is ELEVENBRAVO138. And once again, I thank you for this opportunity.
Hey, we'd like to thank our audience for tuning in. Catch us on YouTube, subscribe. You can even donate. There should be a Cash app there. So thank you, everyone, for listening to the SPORTSKRIB. Look forward to talking to you next week. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Good night.